Good morning.
Good morning.
It is wonderful to be with you. I'm going to start with a brief story as a way of just saying thank you for the opportunity to be here. So in the summer of 1998, I attended the CBF General Assembly in Houston, Texas. I was, at that time, 3 months home from working overseas, teaching English. During that stint overseas, I had contracted a mosquito-borne virus and for several days laid in a hospital, cared for by people with whom I could barely communicate, wondering if God had called me to this place, and now I was going to die there. The first couple days, I was afraid that if I fell asleep, I would not wake up. The third day, I was whisked off to ICU without my glasses, which even then was still a real problem, and also without any visitors, which meant I really didn't have anybody with me who spoke English at all, and told my friends not to tell my mother, who I was afraid would immediately board a plane and try to get to me. I went on this overseas adventure energized by calling and service. I came home exhausted and confused, feeling unfaithful and rudderless. 2 weeks before becoming ill there, while walking along the beach in the town where I lived, I had the deep sense that maybe I would live there forever. Maybe God was calling me to live there forever. So I arrived in Houston with a friend of mine from Wake Forest as an undergrad, Anita, who had just finished seminary herself and was looking for a job, and we wandered around the exhibit hall, neither of us people who really talked to everybody at every table, but people who were definitely going to stop at the Divinity School at Wake Forest University table where I met Scott Hudgens. And Scott talked to us about the school, which was starting in August 1999. He described it the way it's still described: Christian by tradition, Baptist in heritage, ecumenical in outlook. What I remember most from that very first conversation about this school, remembering back to 1989 as an undergrad when the first announcement was made. But what I remember from that first conversation with Scott was the image of community that he shared with us. WakeDiv would be a place where you learn and serve together, worship and eat together, and if interested, could even live together. I was not interested in that. The classes would be small, the faculty engaging and available as they were. There would be a unique course called Colloquium with all students and faculty present. Jill's the only one in the room. We shared this experience. I was sold at the word community. I left that conversation wishing the school was opening in 1998 because I needed a plan right then, or so I thought. As it would turn out, it took me another year to get myself together after that illness experience, enough to get to Div School. And that Div School, as you know, turned out to be here. And it would be here in this place with these people and in the weaving of new stories that my faith and identity would be reassembled. Over the years, as you heard in my introduction, I have loved staying connected through Art of Ministry and panel conversations about chaplaincy and Div School events, always enriched by being present in this place, by the learning and connections. And I just wanted to begin with that story because I know all of you have come here by some story. And after 25 years, it just feels like an honor to stand here with you today to share a word. So, thank you. It's good to be here. It always feels like coming home. So, shifting to our text, to the message. I read a post last night before I went to bed. It was shared by my friend Katie, written by her friend Tiffany, and it sounded like Tiffany's original plan this past weekend in Asheville had something to do with a wedding, but the venue was destroyed. What she wrote in her post struck me as I thought about our text. The number one hurricane lesson is to network. While everyone was out scooping out our area and helping people, I was talking to the grandma on her porch. I figured if she sat on her porch, she must know a lot about the neighborhood, and she did. She was such a blessing to us. We left all the food we had with them, but food and water for the neighborhood was still getting very low. The street we were on was sharing their resources with each other, and even helped the victims that fled their homes being flooded on the river. As it took a few days for people to get into help. We ate dinner last night at a restaurant where they had natural gas, so they were cooking all of their food for the community before it went bad. And I read this, and I thought this is one of many stories really around the world of modern day feeding of the 5,000. This familiar story from Matthew 14 begins with a response to a catastrophic event. Just before what we read today, John the Baptist was beheaded. Jesus heard the news and headed out of town. The story which unfolds reminds us of what we already know. God's sustaining grace shows up in people, in shared spaces and places, and in the power of stories. God's sustaining grace weaves people, places, and stories into the fabric of community. And in community, miracles happen. In the aftermath of learning about John's death, Jesus expresses a pretty natural, understandable response. He tries to withdraw, to find some space for himself, to take in the news. He heads out on a boat to a deserted place. It's not hard to imagine why. Maybe he needed a place to cry in private. Maybe he needed a place to shake his fist at God and ask why a few times, away from the eyes of those who would judge his response as right or wrong, good or bad, expected or unexpected. Maybe he was overwhelmed by the threat of Herod's power, represented by John's death, and he needed a minute to pause and breathe. Maybe he needed space to grieve apart from anyone who would rank his grief as a measure of his own faith. Jesus, fully human. It would make complete sense, right? Grief and trauma can do this to us. When we first learn of a loss, we can feel disoriented, untethered, overwhelmed, confused, unbelieving, disbelieving, as in we deny the very event has occurred. The overwhelm of our experience narrows our focus and energy so that we can survive. Our brains and nervous systems are created from the start with this capacity to survive by bringing focus under stress. Jesus needs his own moment. Ministers leading through loss and trauma often need their own moment too. So solitude and focus here, though, is not the whole story. And Jesus shares his role as main character with 5,000 other main characters here. He departs alone for the deserted place, only to be followed on foot by the crowd. It seems to me that Jesus taking a boat might have served as a shortcut. So maybe he received a few moments, a little bit of time by himself. What appears in the crowd's journey to the deserted place, to see Jesus, is also a key component of human resiliency, connection. Solitude for conserving energy, rest, and adjustment are definitely keys to responding. And in the response of the crowd, we see the flip side of the coin, so to speak, in this same first verse of the story. Jesus moved away, and the crowds moved toward. This, too, represents the unique wiring of our human existence, our brains and our nervous systems, wired for community. We are strengthened through connection. We draw collective energy through the knowledge that we are not alone. We hear it repeated throughout the biblical text. Fear not, fear not, fear not. You are not alone. So Jesus goes ashore and meets the crowd with compassion. He sees their need and is moved to respond, to heal, and to help. They are together in the deserted place, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Jesus and all the people. Jesus is with the crowd, and the crowd is with Jesus. In the book, This Here Flesh, Cole Arthur Riley writes this. If you've suffered an anxiety attack, maybe you've encountered the grounding techniques of the five senses. What's one thing you smell? Tell me two things you hear. There is a mysterious entanglement between our welfare and our capacity to ground ourselves in a particular place. We are meant to be connected to our where, to the sensory experience of it. I feel the connection of it here in this place this morning. The simple beholding of place can slow your heart and steady your breath. It is quite the protective force. Over the past few days, we have seen images and heard the laments, excuse me, of people who have lost, for a time perhaps, the sense of their protective force called place. A word I have heard several times just in the past few days, a word that carries weight of love and memory, nostalgia, and heartache, is hometown. Yesterday morning, I happened to reach out to one of our chaplains who works with our first responder team and asked if she was with the team in Western North Carolina. I didn't really think that she had gone, but I knew that I should check because if she had the opportunity, she would have. What I didn't remember, though, when I reached out to her was her personal connection to the mountains. What she responded with was that she was not there, that she still had family unaccounted for, that a woman from her hometown had died in a landslide, that she was able to hear through the National Guard that her grandmother was okay. I reached out to others, receiving another message from a member of our team with family in Hendersonville. He listed his people and the state of their places, the stories he was hearing, and then he too concluded with the words, "It's my hometown." And a friend on Facebook, someone I know from my years here at Wake, from Irwin, Tennessee. 33 people missing in her hometown. Please pray for my hometown. Hometowns. We all have a hometown. Hometowns have become wilderness places, literally and figuratively. The deserted place in this story, sometimes thought of also as a wilderness place. Again, from Cole Arthur Riley. Isn't it something that in Genesis, God makes a home for things before God makes the thing? Not the fish first, but the sea. Not the bird first, but the sky. Not the human first, but the garden. I like to think of God hunched over in the garden, fingernails hugging the brown soil, mighty hands cradling mud, like it's the last flame in a windstorm. A God who says, not out of my own womb, but out of this here dust will I make you. Place. Place has always been the thing that made us. We cannot escape being formed by it. There is something I love about this image of God saying to us as we are cradled in the muck of life, "From this here dust I will make you." And in the context of our current news, I imagine this addition. From this here dust I will make you, and I will remake you, and I will remake you. This will become a birthplace, though for now you are in the pitch black of the womb. God's sustaining grace, present in the people and the places, is where we find ourselves. In the deserted place where Jesus and the crowd are gathered, the disciples become aware of the time and the location, and that people must eat. As we heard, when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away, so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." And the disciples replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." We have nothing here. How many times have we told ourselves and God this same story? I have nothing here. We have nothing here. If we are not careful, the internal storyline can shift to an identity statement. I am nothing here. In this crowd of 5,000, everyone is someone. Everyone is invited to dinner. Everyone will eat. This is in stark contrast to the party Herod threw at the start of Matthew 14. And Herod's party was in stark contrast to the widows and Samaritans and women and children and injured and tax collectors and sick and poor, all the people Jesus invited, touched, and healed through his ministry. Jesus invites the disciples to reframe the story they are telling themselves, to imagine that what they have is more than nothing. It is something. We can empathize with the disciples, can't we? The images of people in Western North Carolina without road access, power, water, food, internet, cell service are as acutely in touch with a vision of the need of the 5,000. The image of the disciples looking down at what they have and then slowly looking back up at the crowd and Jesus, seeing with their own eyes that the scale of their resources does not match the magnitude of the need. What is in their baskets compared to the size of the crowd equaled nothing. We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. There are certain stories in our lives which leave us particularly prone to measuring our current resources and declaring we have nothing. Arthur Frank, author of The Wounded Storyteller, would likely describe it as a chaos narrative. In the framework of the hero's journey, the story might be described as the threshold moment. Pediatric oncologist Ray Barfield described it several years ago in a podcast I heard with Kate Bowler as a line in the sand moment. He was talking about his awareness as a physician that when he shared a diagnosis with parents, he was participating in a before and after line in the sand moment. You heard me identify my own before and after line in the sand story. Line in the sand moments can leave us in utter shock and wondering which way to turn. They are the stories which shape and reshape our very identities, and often leave us anxious to know and understand how the story is going to turn out. A line in the sand story is unfolding in our own state as I speak, as you listen. All which we say and do today is held in the context of the devastation we have seen and heard. We might feel like we have nothing in comparison to the magnitude of the need. And we too receive the same invitation Jesus offered his disciples. Bring me what you have. Jesus will bless it, no matter how little we perceive it to be. And in the blessing, it will be multiplied, and all will eat. God's sustaining grace shows up in people, in shared spaces and places, and in the power of stories. God's sustaining grace weaves people, places, and stories into the fabric of community, and in community, miracles happen. May we find ourselves this day rooted in the power of who we are as God's people, fully loved and accepted. May we find ourselves grounded in the power of this place, open to the formation and transformation possible through learning. May we find ourselves transformed by the power of stories told and reframed. May we find ourselves woven into the fabric of this community and stories still unfolding in this place as we gather at the table to eat. Amen.
A blessing.